Alright, looks like we're just about going. And welcome to Philosophy Roulette. This is number 44, where we grab a random philosophy paper off the interwebs and read it and review it to see what it's all about. So, here we are at Phil Papers, and let's just go to sort by new. New book, Archive for History of Exact Sciences, a study of Babylonian planetary motion to the planet Venus. Well, Archive for Mathematical Logic, Bioethics, Altered Inheritance, CRISPR, and the Ethics of Human Genome Editing. Oh, it's a review. British Journal for Aesthetics. Let's see. See how long this paper is. Well, if it's not available, it's not available. Can't do much about that. Cafe Montaigne of books, but that's not in English. What we could just do is be like, hey, British Journal for Aesthetics sounds cool. Let's go look at British Journal for Aesthetics. Alright. So. The Ontology of Graphically Fixed Ligatures. See, I got the highlights here for shorter papers. So there's 3 pages. Considering Ethics and Dance. I don't believe them. There's only 3 pages. Let's go see. Alright. There's also 3 pages. Maybe there's a review. Yeah, it's a review. Okay. I was like, that'd be amazing. There's probably all reviews here. No, let's see. If this is here, that'd be cool. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Not usual that there's a download button that says OUP on it, but hey, that was cool. Some silverchair.com. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't matter. Nice little warm-up paper for this morning. So if you're in the chat at any time, you can come by and just type !paper into the chat room, and Nightbot will send you the link to this webpage, and you can follow along. Okay. Causal Loops. Okay, it's 9 pages. I was like, is it really 3 pages? That'd be shocking. I mean, even for like an analysis or thought thing, if you got a paper published with only 3 pages, maybe that'd be a goal in my life or something, if I can get something down to 3 pages. Causal Loops in Time Travel. In this article, I consider a recent suggestion that scenarios in which an artist creates an artwork by copying a reproduction of it that has been sent from the future pose a new challenge to time travel theories. Oh, so they go like that. Oh, they've copied artwork by copying over. So this is one of those where you've got multiple times, and then someone in the past goes and copies their future work and makes an art from their copy of their not yet created artwork. Okay. According to this suggestion, the challenge arises from the fact that there is no explanation for the origin of the work's artistic value within the scenario. If this were so, then this challenge to time travel theories would come on top of well-known problems posed by scenarios in which concrete objects or items of information are sent back in time. By appealing to relationalist theories of art and a projectivist account of artistic value, I argue that artistic value does not go back in time, and thus that the proposed scenarios pose no new difficulty for time travel theories. I will have to see. I'm not sure it seems like I see where the objection is coming from, at least. Let us begin by reviewing some conceptual problems of time travel. In a simple backwards time travel scenario, an item is sent from time t4 to an earlier time t1. As many writers have noted, this scenario seems to open up the way to paradoxes. These paradoxes fall into two main groups: consistency paradox, involving attempts to change history, such as by killing one's own younger self, which lead to causal inconsistencies. Consistency paradoxes will not be at issue here. Bootstrap paradoxes, by contrast, involve self-reinforcing causal loops, such as one in which A causes B, B causes C, and C causes A. In a bootstrap paradox, while it is easy to explain every individual link of the causal chain, the existence of the causal loop as a whole seems inexplicable. Writers on time travel have hitherto discussed causal loops of two main kinds of bootstrap paradoxes. The first is the object loop, in which the item sent back in time is a concrete object. In a simple example, a billiard ball is sent back from time t4 to t1, endures until t4, thereby completing the causal loop. The challenge is then to clarify the cause of the billiard ball's existence. It seems that the history of the universe contains no event that brings the billiard ball into being. The second kind is the information loop, in which the item sent back is a quantity of information. David Deutsch offered the Unproven Theorem scenario as an example. A time traveler goes into the past and reveals the proof of an important theorem to the mathematician who had later been recognized as the first to prove it. This is one of the Star Trek reboots on the theory of transwarp beaming. At least it was in the popular media. It was like, here's your theorem for transwarp beaming. He's like, oh, what do you think? I hadn't thought of that yet. The mathematician goes on to publish a proof, which is then read by the time traveler before setting out. Who thought of the proof? No one, since each of the two participants obtained that value information from the other. In this scenario, because the information travels around the loop, let's see, what year was this? I mean, I'm sure this is older than the 91. Yeah, and the new Star Trek was only a few years ago. In this scenario, because the information travels around the loop, it's difficult to explain the coming into being of the proof. The two examples above illustrate also a further distinction that between closed and open causal loops. In a closed causal loop, A, B, and C are the sole causes of one another. The loop involving the enduring billiard ball is of this kind. In an open causal loop, by contrast, some external causes that are not part of the loop also have an influence. Deutsch's Unproven Theorem scenario is of the latter kind. Completing the loop in this scenario requires not only sending the information back in time, but also an outside causal influence that ensures that the mathematician goes on to publish the proof for the time traveler to read. Most writers regard closed causal loops as more problematic than open loops, since they are causally isolated from the rest of the universe. To these time travel scenarios, Michael Dummett and Storrs McCall have added a variant in which reproductions of artwork are sent back in time. They have presented their scenario as one in which artistic value travels around a causal loop in the same way information does in Deutsch's scenario, and have raised the question how the artwork's artistic value could be explained. McCall has characterized this as an insoluble problem. I interpret Dummett and McCall as conjecturing a causal loop of a new kind in time travel scenarios. Additional to the previously recognized object and information loops, I dub this the value loop. In what follows, drawing on current understandings of artistic value and aesthetics and philosophy of art, I analyzed Dummett and McCall's scenario anew to show that no value loop occurs. Artistic value does not behave in the way concrete objects and information behave in the previously recognized time travel scenarios. I thus conclude that Dummett and McCall's scenario poses no problem for time travel theories beyond the problem that were previously acknowledged. The value loop conjecture. Dummett's scenario has a contemporary fifth-rate artist receive a visit from an art critic of a following era, who tells him that he will come to be regarded as by far the greatest artist of the 20th century. You know, I was just watching Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure the other day. It was on the TV or something, and so they were terrible musicians, but Rufus from the future, played by, oh god, I'm blanking on the name. But one of the people we really could use at the moment, one of the great comedians, blanking, but comes back and tells them they're going to be the greatest artists in history, and that will align the planets and make the world a happy place. So we're going to call this the Bill and Ted. Alright, I apologize to the author. This is not the Bill and Ted paper, but that's basically this is what happened in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Keanu Reeves. Okay. When the artist proudly produces his paintings for inspection, the critic's face falls, and he says, in an embarrassed manner, that the artist cannot yet have struck the inspired vein in which he painted his subsequently celebrated masterpieces, and produces a portfolio of reproductions he has brought with him. Once the critic has returned to his own time, the artist spends the rest of his career creating the artworks that will win him fame from the reproductions that the critic has brought. Whereas Dummett's wording is not completely univocal, his emphasis on the artist's progression from fifth rate to the greatest artist of his time, that he saw the problem as that of explaining the origin of the artistic value of the artworks on which an artist's reputation rests. Alright, to be clear about Bill and Ted, they did time travel to the future and hear their future music, so that does hold for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's still of this type. So what year was this? Causal Loops, 86. Okay, so wait, no, that's Dummett, not Okay, maybe Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was written after Dummett, and therefore it references Dummett. I wonder if they do reference Dummett. That'd be interesting. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Schematically, the artist creates an artwork at time t2. At time t3, this artwork is found to have artistic value. At t4, using time travel, the art critic takes a reproduction of this artwork back to time t1, prior to the moment at which the artist creates the artwork. The artist, having seen the reproduction at time t1, copies it time t2 to create the artwork. Stories McCall, citing Dummett, re-proposed the snare in sharper terms. McCall emphasized even more than Dummett did the problem of pinpointing the instant and agent of the artistic creativity that gave rise to the artwork. Holding that the aesthetic value of a work of art lies in the artistic creativity that produces it, McCall posed the following problem. What is incomprehensible is, who or what creates the work that future generations have? Where is the artistic creativity to be found? McCall assumed that the act of artistic creativity could not have taken place at either T1, since all that happened then was that a reproduction of an artwork appeared in the world, or at T2, since all that happened then was that the artist copied the reproduction. Yet by T3, the world was richer by an amount of artistic value. McCall suggests that accounting for what I have dubbed a value loop such as this was even more difficult than accounting for the object. Well, y'all, if you're watching this now, go back and watch my Hudson about the Garden of Eden. I mean, that just solves all these problems. Yeah, alternate time histories, and you can just inject them, and then God deletes the alternate time history afterwards. And so there is an history with the artistic value. It's just not this history anymore, but it does still exist somewhere in God's mind. McCall suggested that accounting for what I have dubbed a value loop such as this was even more difficult than accounting for the object and information loops that previous time travel scenarios had highlighted. Unlike traditional paradoxes of time travel, this problem has no solution. It is not immediately clear why McCall thought that it would be more difficult to account for a value loop than for an object or information loop, but it seems reasonable to assume that value loops, if they occurred, would pose an additional conceptual problem that time travel theories would have to solve. Coffee. I hope everyone's self-isolation and quarantining is going well. Everyone is happy and healthy, or as healthy as possible, given the circumstances. Yeah. I was reading a paper yesterday and said, the guy was like, I have terrible back pain. I was like, yeah, my knee hurts, you know? Like, it's okay, but it does hurt. Some works of science fiction have explored the scenario that Dummett and McCall described. Hey! For example, Back to the Future, a 1985 film by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, Marty McFly travels back 30 years to 1955. He guides a rock band through a rendition of a song, Johnny Be Good, giving the band members and the audience their first encounter with rock music. The band leader calls Chuck Berry, the musician, by telephone. He says, "You know that new sound you've been looking for? Well, listen to this," and holds up the handset. In 1958 would write and release Johnny Be Good, which would become one of the most valued modern musical compositions. Some film critics balked at the implication that an African-American music pioneer learned the sound of rock music from a white teenager, citing the real-life tendency of white musicians to appropriate black popular music elements. The music seems to forestall that criticism. However, introducing the song, McFly indicates that it was created long before the 1980s, from where he had time traveled. This is an oldie where I come from. That elicits McCall's puzzle. Where does the artistic value in this scenario originate? Yeah, McFly never claimed he owned it, but of course there's plenty of bad history here, so it's a reasonable criticism, because it does sort of I hadn't thought about that before, but you should have gone with the Bill and Ted example here. Bill and Ted is much better, because they were playing the music over a loudspeaker, so that would have been a legit copy in the future of the thing. Okay. Whereas McCall and Dummett and McCall's scenario has attracted comment from various quarters, its novelty has not always come to the fore. Reviewing recent time travel debates, for example, Chris Meek and Christian Woolrich told the story of the unpainted painting reminiscent of Deutsch's Unproven Theorem, where he seems to draw on Dummett and McCall's scenario. The most important element is lacking. One day, an older version of myself knocks on my door, presenting a wonderful painting to me. I keep the tableau until I have saved enough money to be able to afford a time machine. I then use the time machine to travel back in time to visit my younger self, taking the painting along. I ring the doorbell of my earlier apartment and deliver the painting to my younger self. Who has painted the picture? It seems as if no one did, since there is no cause of the painting. Smeek and Woolrich describe here nothing more than an object loop, sending the concrete object consisting of the painting canvas back in time and letting it endure to complete the causal loop is no different than sending back a billiard ball. They did not discuss the origin of the artistic value that the painting might possess. Similarly, Christy Miller objected to McCall's characterizing his time travel scenario as incomprehensible, arguing that it was no more inexplicable than any other causal loop. Miller's response, however, took no account of artistic value or other aspects peculiar to artworks. On the face of it, there is a perfectly good explanation of the scenario, since we can provide a full causal history of original and copy. Had original been different, copy would have been different. Had copy been different, then the original would have been different. This is to interpret McCall's scenario as containing nothing more than an information loop. Other discussions have done more justice to the role of value in McCall's scenario. Craig Bourne and Emily Caddick Bourne proposed 4 possible responses. Their response 4 sought to assuage feelings of puzzlement at McCall's scenario by denying that any element of it undermined the judgment that the painting had aesthetic value. This response hinged partly on the fact that the artist copied reproductions of his own work rather than the work of someone else, which would normally lead us to deny creativity due to the result. Their response 2 added the option of saying that the painting's aesthetic value requires no creativity. These 2 responses amount to conceding that, in my terms, McCall's scenario contains a value loop. Okay. Bourne and Caddick Bourne's other 2 responses queried McCall's stipulation that the paintings had aesthetic value and his claim that the scenario did not involve changing the past, whereas denying these conditions would rule out the value loop takes place in McCall's scenario. These responses have 2 limitations. They are not strictly speaking an answer to McCall's original puzzle, and they leave open the possibility of value loops in general. In the next section, I take a different line, arguing no value loops occur. Okay. So now we're getting there. How artistic value originates. I mean, you didn't have to use time travel to if you can define this, you didn't need to bring up time travel, but that's cool. I mean, it is actually a funny question, like rhetorically. A lot of times there's philosophical problems, and how do you motivate your discussion of them? Because if you want to say something new, you're going to say something different than other people, so you have to come up with a new way to show that what you're saying is relevant to the other people if you're saying something different than the other people. So in some sense, the setup actually is an interesting thing to see how philosophers and writers generally set up their situation to show what they're saying has value. It may not be necessary to, like, there may not be a necessary setup. That may be kind of arbitrary, but that's a question for, like, how do you design a paper to make it sound like what you're saying is relevant to the topic you're saying? Because they may, like, people may just say, well, you're not talking about the same stuff we're not. So you have to really tie into other people's stuff. Anyhow, but I mean, like, how artistic value originates, this headline does not need to be in this paper. It could be in any paper on aesthetics. If Dummett and McCall's problem seems insoluble, as McCall claimed, this is because they tacitly made two interrelated essentialist assumptions in metaphysics of art. First, they assumed that if an artwork consists of a certain artifact, the act of manufacturing the artifact is identical to the act of creating the artwork. Second, they assumed that the moment the artifact of which the artwork consists comes into being, it already possesses the artistic value that makes it a valued artwork. We can solve the problem if we relax these two assumptions and allow that an artifact can acquire both the status of an artwork and artistic value at later than the artifact's moment of manufacture. Alright, so, I mean, you can look at the fountain from Duchamp and did not acquire status of artwork or artistic value at the time of its manufacture. Duchamp is coming up a lot. Support for relaxing the first assumption comes from relational theories of art, such as the institutional theory of George Dickey and others, where some approaches have attempted to demarcate art from non-art by appeal to intrinsic properties of artworks, such as their formal and aesthetic properties. Relational theories have suggested that artworks are artifacts that stand in certain relations to other objects, and especially historical, social, and institutional relations to what Dickey called the art world. As the website, there's a website on philosophy of art, Aesthetics for Birds, something like that. I'm blanking again on names. Ask the question if you've got art world as one word or two. Now I can't remember who they were blaming for the confusion. Anyway, as Dickey put it, an artwork is an artifact that has conferred upon the status of candidate for appreciation by some person or persons acting on behalf of a certain social institution, the art world. This means roughly that an artifact comes to acquire the status of artwork by being treated as such. Support for relaxing the second assumption comes from the projectivism about value. The thesis that value is not found in the world but is instead projected onto objects by observers as a reflection of their responses, such as judgments and emotions to objects. J.L. Mackie has advanced projectivism about moral value, and John McDowell projectivism about aesthetic value. It is easy to extend this stance to artistic value. This view opens the possibility that an artifact may come to acquire artistic value by virtue of the changing responses of observers to it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times good art's not decided to be good art until much later. Now, people can say, project back, we missed it earlier, but this is just saying, hey, we didn't realize this art was so good because, well, in the realization, that's when we conferred the value on the art. Same happens with philosophy a lot. People be writing their philosophy, they die poor and friendless, or unrecognized. Let's just go with unrecognized, although I was thinking of Peirce. And then much later, the people start to realize the value of the philosophy and then get much more interested in the philosophy. Gets elevated as good philosophy as opposed to just some random dude spouting stuff. Okay. If we adopt a relational theory of art and projectivism about artistic value, then we can endorse the following principles. The manufacture of the artifact of which an artwork consists is not identical with the coming into existence of the artwork, since the latter depends on the artifact's coming to be treated as an artwork. Similarly, it need not be the case that an artifact possesses artistic value when it is first manufactured, since it acquired artistic value as a consequence of projection of value into it by observers. These twin approaches offer, among other things, a natural way of regarding ready-made art. That's what I was saying earlier about Duchamp. Ready-made objects lack the status of artwork and artistic value when they are manufactured, but can acquire the status example later. A bottle rack becomes Marcel Duchamp's Egoteur. I can't. I wish I could. I gotta learn how to speak French. Egotoire, maybe. I have no idea. For example, from the vantage point of a relational theory of art and projectivism about artistic value, we can reinterpret the sequence of events in McCall's scenario as follows. We retrace the ordinary chronological sequence of times from T1 to T4. First, a physical object enters the world at T1. This object is new to the world in the sense that it has no causal precursors at times prior to T1. Whereas we will later come to call this object reproduction of the artwork, it cannot be said that this object at T1 either is an artwork or has artistic value. It is merely a physical object. Okay. The artist copies this object at T2 to manufacture an artifact. There is no need to assume that even this artifact either is an artwork or has artistic value at the moment of its manufacture at T2. The artifact manufactured by the artist acquires both the status of artwork and artistic value at T3 through various aesthetic and institutional processes. By T4, the world is richer by a valued artwork. The art critic opts to make a reproduction of this artwork and send it back in time to T1. This suggestion that the reproduction of the artwork lacks the latter's artistic value is supported by Arthur C. Danto's argument from indiscernible counterparts. There may be two objects that are indiscernible from one another such that one has artistic value while the other does not. A reproduction may therefore replicate the physical properties of an original and its beauty, thus offering observers the same perceptual experience, but lack the original's artistic value. There are thus two acts of human creation in McCall's story. The first corresponds to the artist making of the artifact at T2 by copying the object that came into the world at T1. The second act of creation corresponds to the investing of that artifact with the status of artwork with artistic value, which occurs at T3 by dint of the efforts of the artist, observers of the artifact, and other members of the art world. Let us consider how this interpretation applies to events in Back to the Future. McFly, the time traveler, creates in 1955 a new physical object consisting of a one-off sequence of sound with the duration of 2 to 3 minutes. This entity in 1955 is not an artwork, nor does it have artistic value. You see, this right here is perhaps the conceit of this paper, that the entity in 1950 is not artwork, nor does it have artistic value. Let me finish up this paragraph because I might have something to say. If no one had responded to it, it would have no relation to the art world and no value would have been projected into it. Yeah, okay. Chuck Berry copies this physical object to produce artifacts in 1958 in the form of a written score and sound recording titled Johnny Be Good. There is no need to assume that even these artifacts have the status of artworks or artistic value at the instant of their manufacture. They acquire this status and value in the period to follow through various aesthetic and institutional processes. Being 1985, the world is richer by a valued musical composition. McFly takes a representation of this artwork stored in his memory back to 1955, and then produces what is at that time merely a new physical object. On reflection, McCall's question, what is incomprehensible is who or what creates the artwork that future generations value, where is the artistic creativity found, are ambiguous. The artist creates the works in the sense of artifacts at T2. These artifacts acquire both the status of artwork and artistic value, in virtue of which future generations come to value them in a creative effort by the artist and others at T3. See, this entity in 1950 is not an artwork, nor does it have artistic value. Now, there are two, if you remember the movie, which you might, Marty McFly is playing this on stage at a high school dance. Everyone else in the room, except for himself and Chuck Berry, and Chuck Berry's cousin, don't really appreciate it at that time. Chuck Berry appreciates it because Chuck Berry bothers to go on and copy it to be Johnny Be Good. Chuck Berry's cousin appreciates it because Chuck Berry's cousin calls Chuck Berry to tell Chuck Berry that this is the new sound he was looking for, and Marty McFly himself appreciates it in 1955. Everyone else in the room is sort of freaked out by it. So, this seems false, at least in the case of the movie, because it's not just the future person who appreciates it, it's two other people. It's Chuck Berry's cousin and Chuck Berry who hears it and bothers to do something about it. So this doesn't seem like it's a true statement, actually, in the course of the movie. Because if Chuck Berry is not part of the art world, or the musicians that are playing the dance, including Chuck Berry's cousin, and Chuck Berry himself, they are part of the art world, at least. Okay, depending on how you slice up art world. Thank you, Aesthetics for Birds. I'm not entirely certain on how you quantify over that. But if they do appreciate it, then it doesn't seem like this is a true statement that it does not have artistic value, because they, at least two people in the 1955 timeline, do appreciate its artistic value, and they are members of the art world, being musicians. Granting that musicians of, like, just random guys playing high school dance count as part of the art world. If no one had responded to it, it would have no relation to the art world, no value been projected into it. But that's exactly the case. If no one... This did happen, though, and it happened as it was happening. So this is a problem for not the time travel theory going on right now, but for the institutional theory, because it seems to disagree with the institutional theory. The value was not institutionally given, it was immediately recognized by both Chuck Berry and his cousin, or at least Chuck Berry's cousin, for that matter. Even if Chuck Berry took some time, we don't know. So yeah. That's the question. Why was it bothered to be remembered if it didn't have any artistic value when Marty McFly was playing it? Okay. But this is a separate problem. I think that what I'm complaining about is a problem for the theory, not for the position being put forward here in this paper. So, okay. So it's going to solve this paper, according to the institutional and projection view, is going to solve the time travel loop. I think the argument here is pretty good. The argumentation, there's no problem with it, but it does sort of rest on ambiguity here, is what it means to have artistic value, especially when someone had responded to it. Okay, continuing. From artwork to reproduction and back. Dummett and McCall's scenario does not require any concrete object to travel around a causal loop. The artist might as well destroy the reproductions as soon as he has created the artworks. However, the scenario involves an information loop in which information is transferred from the artworks to the reproductions and vice versa. Dummett sees in that a further puzzle. The existence of the reproduction is to be explained in the usual way by reference to the existence of the originals, and the existence of the originals can likewise be explained by reference to that of the reproductions from which they were copied. But there is no reason whatever for their joint existence. No reason why there should be any paintings, any reproductions like that. Yeah, it's a separate problem. Dummett's wording suggests that this is a closed causal loop, one in which all causal factors are the sole causes of one another, with no role for any external causes that are not part of the loop. Miller, too, thinks that this is possible to construct a closed loop involving artistic value, since plausibly the existence of and properties of copy, artist, and time travel or at the various locations in the loop are in part caused by events outside the loop. It is plausible that McCall's scenario is an open loop. Well, let's set that aside, since we can surely come up with a similar example in which the loop is closed. Well, it depends on your views on causality, if you can make closed causal loops without causes, but I mean, it's unmoved movers. You're an unmoved mover area in that case. And like ungrounded, unmoved mover, that's basically be aesthetically grounded in some sense. It would just, an aesthetic thing showed up. Okay. In fact, the causal loop in Dummett and McCall's scenario is necessarily open, like that in Deutsch's Unproven Theorem scenario. Both the act of going from artwork to reproduction and even more pertinently, that of going from reproduction to artwork are not purely mechanical processes. They depend on external factors involving effort and expertise that are not contained within the causal loop. Yeah, it's not so easy to copy a painting. That's why forgers are in high demand. maybe not high demand, I don't know. But they do get paid. First, going from artwork to reproduction, Dumb assume that the object that comes into world T1 has intrinsically the status of a reproduction of something. However, unintentional accounts of representation, such that of Nelson Goodman, an object attains the status of a representation of something not wholly on the strength of structural similarity, but partly also in virtue of the intention of the users regarding the object as a representation of something. This intention amounts to a causal factor external to the causal loop. Second, going from reproduction to artwork. The artist copying the reproduction to produce the artwork requires two creative acts. The first, to create the artifact that will become the artwork, and the second, to attribute the status of artwork to the artifact. The influence of these external acts reduces the degree of mystery of the causal loop. On further reflection, Dummett and McCall's scenario is no more puzzling than one in which a flower is sent back time from T4 to T1. On which a flower is sent back from time T4 to T1. An artist paints a portrait of it at T2. An observer at T4 arranges for a flower like the one in the painting to be sent back to T1. Okay. Yes, slightly less mysterious. Okay. In conclusion, so basically, before getting to conclusion, is that artworks are not so cut and dry as just objects or information, and therefore it's a lot harder to pin down a closed causal loop. So it's, in that sense, it actually has more outs than the other the other loops that are normally dealt with. So that's a fair point. In conclusion, if we adopt a relational theory of art and projectivism about artistic value, we can see that there is a disanalogy between concrete objects and artistic value in time travel scenarios. A billiard ball that is sent back in time and endures may describe a causal loop, leading to a puzzle when we realize that the history of the universe contains no event that brought the billiard ball into existence. By contrast, artistic value describes no causal loop, irrespective of any claim that we send back in time. Instead, an artifact acquires artistic value as a result of effort by the artist and others. In any time travel scenario involving artistic value, as a consequence, the history of the universe contains a set of human acts that bring about the value into the world. Whereas time travel scenarios may contain object and information loops, therefore they do not contain value loops. Clearly, relational theories of art, projectivism about artistic value, and intentional accounts of representation will stand or fall primarily according to the outcome of debates in aesthetics and philosophy of art. We might, however, judge that these theories gain some minor additional support from the fact that they enable a solution to Dummett and McCall's problem, whereas this remains an insoluble on alternative essentialist view of art and This remains insoluble on alternative essentialist views of art and representation. This exercise further illustrates the benefit of considering insights from philosophy of art, where problems in other areas of philosophy involve aspects of art. Okay, so on these views, you don't get the same problems that you get with the concrete objects and information things. I do worry about revenge in this case. Like, can we create a paradox of institutional an institutional paradox where we send back the art world, like something of the art world, into the past, and therefore the art world, if you send the art world into the past in some way, not just an object of art, but the art world into the past, and that affects how the art world is in the future, then you probably might have, I'm worried that you might get another problem here, because the art world is what's deciding, and so if you were able to send like institutional something, or like you were able to send an institution back in time, I mean, maybe a lot harder to do than just a painting. I don't know, I've never time traveled before, but if you were able to send an institution back in time, a part of the art world, then at that time they would judge it to be artistically valuable, or something to be artistically valuable, and then there'd be art created according to that institutional value, and it would be judged to that, and then in the future again it would still be judged because that's where the institution came from, and we'd get a loop again. So I'm a little worried that this theory can be revenged in some sense. You can create a next level up using the concept of projection and relational theories of art if you bring the things that are doing the projecting and relating back in time themselves, not just the artwork. That is sort of the thing I was saying about Marty McFly up here, where Marty McFly knew that he was part of the art world. Well, he was not really part of the art world. He was a high school student, just who liked to play music. That usually doesn't merit being part of the art world. But say you brought like an art curator back, or like a record label executive who makes decisions on what counts as good art, good music. Then that would bring the institution back in time with you, and then you might be able to recreate the art paradox about the institution existing in two places, and then where would the institutional projection have come from. But I don't know. That's just first draft. Just first pass, just sort of not quite buying this it's going to be such an easy out according to the institutional theories or relational theory of art and projectivism. Yeah. The essential view of art, I don't know. I'd have to think if there's a way out of this in terms of essentialist views of art. But this was a fun essay. As the author stated, this is a nice exercise in showing how aesthetic considerations can play into other topics and make for interesting perspectives. And so this is a well done. Okay, thank you for watching. That'll be it for this morning. I'll probably be back tonight since there's nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Have a good day and stay safe, everybody.